Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. This time on the podcast, a man who combines his passion for classic rock and roll and his passion for writing. He's a 5-time Emmy Award-winning sports director, and in his 40 years of television sports, he has directed games for the Mets, the Yankees, the Islanders, the Atlanta Braves, NBA on TNT, college football, basketball, MLB for ESPN, and college sports for CBS, NHL, and NBC. Plus, he did the Baltimore Ravens preseason games. Will you please welcome my new friend, Dan Reagan. How you doing, Dan?
I'm great, Rick. How are you? Great to be with you.
I'm really excited about this because I've been in radio all my life, and I've heard some great stories that musicians have told me about how songs came to be and such, too. So this is going to be right in my wheelhouse, so I'm really looking forward to seeing which ones you found along the way. First, I want to ask you, humble beginnings, how did your love affair with music begin?
Well, I grew up as the youngest of 5 kids, and my brothers and sisters, mostly my brothers, were always listening to music. And I grew up, I was a child of the 60s, and so the British Invasion, the Beatles, and then, of course, you had the Beach Boys and all of that music from the 60s. I heard it all the time on the radio or when I was driving around with my brothers. And it just, it always just had, I always had a fondness for it. And even at a fairly young age, I was interested in the words to the song and what they meant. And so it just kind of really took off from there. And I had a great love affair with the Beatles, and then Chicago came along, and Chicago became my all-time favorite other than the Beatles. And I also have a great love for Steely Dan and other groups of that era. So, and back then in the 60s and 70s, classic rock, you could hear anything on the radio then. It wasn't,
Right, exactly.
You could hear Roberta Flack, and then you could hear Led Zeppelin, and then you could hear Carly Simon, and you could hear the Rolling Stones, and all of that. It was just it wasn't categorized.
I totally hear you. I know once I'll be playing a Marvin Gaye song. The next thing I'll play some Eagles, and then I'll play some ZZ Top. It's amazing right. At the time, back in the 80s especially, what we were playing on classic rock radio, and I'm just glad of it because that is just. It's one thing I've absolutely loved was just the music, and because it is the soundtrack of our lives, isn't it? Yeah, you remember when
exactly.
you remember where you hear a song, it's like, oh gosh, I remember I was on my way for my first child to be born. I heard that song. Well, you are a TV sports director also, and you wind up having 5 Emmy Awards. So congratulations on that. How did that all begin?
My goal in life actually was to become a sports announcer.
Oh, okay.
That was what I always wanted to do. And I went to college and I did 2 years of play-by-play college football and basketball at my college radio station, which was CW Post, which is now Long Island University. And I grew up in New York, and I was fortunate to grow up there. And I listened to Marv Albert announcing the Knicks and Ranger games on the radio, and I was listening to the Mets and Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson and Ralph Kiner. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the next Marv Albert and Bob Murphy. And that was the path that I thought I was going to take. And then when I was my second semester of my senior year in college, I did an internship for what was then a young fledgling cable television company called Sports Channel, which was part of Cablevision. And the internship was with the production, and I was going to Mets and Yankees and Islanders games. And when the internship ended, I went and I asked, I said, thank you, I've had a great time. I'm going to be graduating in a week. You need to send my advisor a grade. And they said, not so fast. We want to hire you.
Oh, that's always nice.
Yeah. I'm like, so wait a minute, you're going to pay me to actually go and watch Mets and Yankees games and keep score and go to the Islander games? I think I can do this. And I put my broadcasting, my behind the microphone aspirations to the side. And at that time, it was getting to the point where the former athletes were just starting to make a breakthrough in the broadcasting.
Right. Yes.
Also, so I took kind of a little bit of a detour, and instead of aspiring then to be behind the microphone and in front of the camera, I took a stab at being behind the scenes and and within 4 or 5 years of being a statistician or production assistant, I then became an associate director, and then I became a director. And I started direct. I did some New Jersey Nets games and Yankees, and then I did the Mets and the Islanders, and then we moved to Atlanta, and I did the Atlanta Braves and the NBA on TNT, and then I went to ESPN.
Wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. I got to ask you, you have 5 Emmys. Were there any particular games that really stood out as like, I was so glad to be a part of that game?
I get that question often, and I've done so many. I guess it was the late '80s, early '90s. Pete Rose was the player manager for the Cincinnati Reds,
Hmm.
and there was a close call at first base, and it went against the Reds, and he came out and he actually pushed the umpire.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
you
You'd never
never
do that.
see
Yeah,
that
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you see them go nose to nose,
Uh-huh.
but you never see him physically push the umpire. And of course, he immediately got tossed, and then the fans started throwing garbage on the
Oh,
field, and
no.
it was a wild scene. I mean, you don't baseball arguments back then before replay review were a dime a dozen, but this was really different. Did a lot of Stanley Cup playoffs games, which were really neat and really interesting. There isn't really one that stands out because they just kind of get lost in the
Absolutely, yeah.
mix.
Hmm.
And I did some NBA playoff games as well. Did a lot of Atlanta Braves games. And those were in the glory years when they had Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz at the front of the rotation. And I grew a great affinity and still have a great affinity for Greg Maddox. Nicknamed him the master. They call him the professor. But getting paid to watch him pitch every 5 days was pretty neat because he really knew how nobody pitches like he does anymore. They have a bunch of throwers now. It's all about speed and velocity, where he was all about, you know, location, movement, and deceiving the hitter.
Speaking of Greg Maddox, I just recently got a graded 10 Greg Maddox rookie card. And
Nice.
that's one of, because he was with the Cubs too, because I'm outside of
Yep.
Chicago here, and we loved him in the Cubs for sure.
Yeah.
He's a great pitcher, real good. All right, let's talk about your book. The book is called Classic Rock Songs Revealed, Volume 1 and 2. All right, like I say, I was a radio broadcaster all my life, and I know some of these stories here, but I want to start off with a band that Leslie and I absolutely love. And you just mentioned you as probably one of your favorite bands, Chicago. I had the great honor of talking to Lee Loughnane, who's the trumpet player, and also Walt Perizador on sax. What Chicago song are you going to share with us today that's from your Classic Rock Songs Revealed?
Well, okay. So the one that I will share with you is written by my favorite guy. You just named two of the three horn section. Okay. And the third guy, you didn't mention
Jimmy
Jimmy
Pankow.
Pankow. Uh, he's my favorite.
Okay, mine
He's
too.
my favorite. He's my favorite musician, not named John Lennon.
Ah,
And their hit song "Just You and Me," he wrote after he had a vicious fight with his wife. They had a really, a knockdown, drag him out, and she went and locked herself in the bathroom, and he went to the bathroom door and was trying to coax her to come out, and she was saying, go away, you're a beast." And he thought for a moment to himself, am I going to go through the door or what am I going to do here? But instead, he was moved to go to the piano, and he sat down, and that song just came out of him in one piece. He said it never happened to him like that before. He sat down, and the whole song, words and music, came all at the same time. And then after he had finished it, he recorded it, and then he went back and played it for his wife, and that kind of diffused the situation.
absolutely. So we learned one important thing, that if you ever get in a fight with your significant other, it's always great to write a song about them.
Yeah,
It's
right.
strange you picked that song because that's Leslie and our love song. That's our song to one another, Just You and Me. Just one of those really good songs. Next, I want to talk about the band Boston, one of my all-time favorites that came out in late 76, early 77. Their debut album sold a gazillion albums, and I had the great honor of talking with Brad Delp, the singer, before he passed away. What song are you going to feature from Boston?
Well, there's a lot. I spoke with Tom Scholes in depth. I also did speak with Brad Delp. But the line in the song, where you climb into the top of the company ladder, I hope it doesn't take too long.
Rock and Roll Band.
Don't you?
Hmm.
Right. So I asked Tom Scholes if that really, you know, if that incident happened to him. And he told me a story. Of course, you probably know this. He worked at Polaroid. He went to MIT. There aren't very many MIT grads if you shake the rock and roll tree, but there's Tom Scholes. And he was working as an engineer at Polaroid when he was and making these tapes in his basement, in his garage. And his boss called him into his office one day and told him that they had to lay some people off. And he said to him, look, I know you're trying to do this. You're doing this rock and roll thing. And if you're going to go do that and make a lot of records and all that, then I'd rather let you go than let somebody else go who needs the job a lot. And Scholes looked at his boss and said, are you kidding me? He goes, you know what the odds are of me ever making any kind of money in rock and roll? They're like 1 in a million. Well, as you just mentioned, the first album comes out, sells gazillion records. And so it was time for Tom to go in and clean out his office. And at that very time when he had a box of stuff in his arms and he gets to the elevator, and as the elevator door is opening up, the boss walks out and looks at him and said, 1 in a million, huh? Well, it had to be somebody. So,
great story.
So
I love stories like that. By the way, we're talking with Dan Reagan. He's got a brand new book out. He's got 2 books out called Classic Rock Songs Revealed. We're going to continue with that in a few moments here, but I would like to take a moment here and say thanks for tuning in to the Someone You Should Know podcast, heard on the World Wide Web at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast.com. If you happen to go to our website, you're going to see recent news plus our archive of more than 210 episodes. And we thank you very much for checking that out. Now, according to Buzzsprout, the service that shares us to all the streaming platforms, so very blessed to be heard in over 2,500 cities and 96 countries around the world. A couple of new ones to add to our growing list: Elk Grove Village, Illinois, Boardman, Oregon, King George, Virginia, and Derry in Northern Ireland. Someone You Should Know podcast heard wherever quality streaming audio is available. I'm going to do a real quick sidebar for you, Dan. You talk about John Lennon being your all-time favorite performer or singer, writer, and everything. Leslie and I just came back from a 10-day trip of London and Liverpool that saluted the Beatles. We went to John's home. We went to his Paul's mom's home. We went to Abbey Road Studios. We went to Penny Lane. We went to all the haunts. So that's something to check out. They have those tours, and they're very, very cool. We hopped aboard the Magical Mystery Tour bus for some tours around the city too as well.
You know, I'm jealous of you because that's the tour that I really want to do and take. And my best friend and his wife and daughter went and did that very tour that you just talked about. And I'll tell you something, John Lennon was really the main inspiration for me writing these books. And the reason for that is you probably, recall this very well as I do. When after Lennon was murdered, Playboy magazine released a series of 2 articles that they did an interview with him, and they released it in 2 parts. And one was the typical Playboy Q&A. The other one was John Lennon describing what all the Beatles songs were about.
Wow.
And that came out, and I was fascinated. Here was John Lennon explaining all the Beatles songs. And I saved that for the longest time. And I remember at the time, and I was still in college then, but I remember thinking at the time, why can't everybody do this? If John Lennon can tell us what all the Beatles songs are about, why can't all the other artists tell us what their songs are about? And so that's where the very germ of this idea came back in 1981, reading that. And then I started this journey back in 1994. I started interviewing people for like 4 years, put it down because my kids were very young. My wife became ill, and then picked it up and dropped it many, many times. And then it finally, when COVID hit, I had no more excuses. I procrastinated long enough, and I was able to interview many people during COVID. And that's how the book grew from 1 volume to 2. And I got it completed after starting it in 1994, finally completed it in 2022.
Absolutely wonderful. I love hearing that. Great stories. And we're going to hear one more here. This one, we're going to travel north of the border. One of my favorite Canadian performers, Gordon Lightfoot. Got a Gordon story for us?
Gordon Lightfoot, I had a very brief, I spoke with him. I think I want to say it was very late in the game. It was probably 2021. I only had about a 30-minute period with him. Wonderfully nice man. Um, you know, it, I think his song, If You Could Read My Mind, is one of the greatest pieces of music. And lyrically, just the way he put that together was just terrific. But his number one, the song of his that was the biggest selling hit that he had was the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Hmm.
And it was pretty much very similar to John Lennon's A Day in the Life, where, you know, Gordon heard about this unbelievable, horrific sinking of the ship and read the article. And just like Lennon did with A Day in the Life, he sat down and wrote the lyrics based off of what he read in I think it was Newsweek magazine. If I'm not positive about that, and took that story, wrote the lyrics down, and put that song together. And they what the take that we all hear was one take. He went into the studio. He
Wow.
started his guitar string broke, and he says, "I got to stop. I got to change my guitar string." And then after he did it, he went back and did it, and they kept that version.
That's amazing. In doing your research for these books and all these interviews and such, which is there one that particularly surprised even you?
Billy Joel said that all of his music came to him in dreams,
Wow.
and that was fascinating to me. So to hear him go through that process, and he's in the book, he's in volume one, was really fascinating. Um, Al Stewart was also really fascinating to listen to. He because and I brought those two up because Billy Joel said that writing lyrics for him was like tantamount to a woman giving birth to a child. It was very laborious. It was the hardest thing was to write the lyrics. On the other hand, you have Al Stewart, who for his album Year of the Cat, he wrote four sets of lyrics for every song on that
Oh,
album.
dear
Year
Lord.
of the Cat didn't start out as Year of the Cat. It was started out as Man in the Footlights or something. I forget. I've got to go back and look. But he had two different titles and three different titles and three different entirely different sets of lyrics. And he played it what he thought was the version for the record company. He said, "Nah, we don't really like this." And so he went back, okay. And at the time, he was dating an Asian woman, and he she told him that that particular year was the year of the cat. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting." And then he was he would watch the movie, and he he just wrote another set of lyrics with the same melody, and
Wow.
he did that for most of his songs. And I said to him, I think you know this already, but do you know how unusual you are that you can just write lyrics that easily?" He goes, "Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I know how different I am
Yeah.
because most people I think I've heard, you know, the lyrics don't come to them as easily." I said, "No, they don't. Trust me." All the people I spoke to said that writing the lyrics is really a job.
Oh, yeah. Here's one for you. I had the great honor of talking with Steve Winwood. This is probably
Uh,
87. Yeah, probably say 87. I'm in Denver, and I got a chance to talk to Steve. And one of my all-time favorite songs was from Traffic called "The Low Spark of High Heeled Boys." One of the
love
reasons
it.
I loved it so much is because it was a good bathroom break song, over 11 minutes long. But I also loved how jazzy it was. It was just one of those great songs. But I must have got him on a bad day or something because he was either heavily medicated or heavily well served. Because the answer I got out of him, I said, what is the story behind the Low Spark of High Heeled Boys? And he goes, "Oh, basically, my music is a combination of words and sounds." And that was the answer. I'm going,
Oh no, what a disappointment.
oh, I
That's such
know.
a great
I
song.
know. And I'm sure I got the answer years later, but it just that always stood out with me as far as, I mean, someone I just could not wait to talk to. And that was the answer I got, was like, "Okay, can you unpack
Uh,
that a little bit?" Yeah, there's like word poems, it's just a lot word. Oh, okay. Okay. We'll go on from there. Hey, listen, I'm going to be
uh,
speaking with Mark Farner of Grand Funk Railroad in a couple of days. You got a good Grand Funk Railroad song that you could share with us?
well, yeah, you know what? I'll let you ask him because I could go on and on about this particular song. But you mentioned it, I think, earlier when we were or before we started. I'm Your Captain and Closer to Home. Wait until he tells you that story. That's one of the longest stories in my book, and it's because he told me the story. He basically he briefly he before he goes to sleep at night, he always says a prayer, he said. And in that particular night, he asked God to give him a song that would have a lot of meaning and be a powerful song. He woke up at like 3 in the morning and he had these lyrics in his head. And he got up and he wrote down these lyrics, had no idea what they pertained to at all. Got up the next morning, and he owns horses, and he was out with the horses and stuff. And then all of a sudden, that opening riff came to him. He went and grabbed his guitar and started playing that riff. And the longer he played, he then went and found the lyrics and said, maybe these belong together. And they did. And he wrote, I'm Your Captain. And that song has become an anthem for not only the Vietnam War vets, but for veterans in general.
Yeah, I'm one of them, and I absolutely love that song. I think I mentioned it to a couple of people that song would be. I've heard so many thousands of songs. That would probably be in my top 50 of all time. That too,
Easily.
That too, also another nice long 10-minute bathroom break song.
Yeah.
But the ending with the full orchestration and everything it just brings tears to my eyes because it's just such a good song. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with Mark. So your ears might be burning that day. I'll definitely tell him that my good friend Dan Reagan told me a good story to share with you. In the open, I mentioned the fact that you're involved with sports broadcasting, and in an email you said you were busy at the PGA Tour Championship. Can you tell us what you were doing there and how it all turned out?
Yeah, I live here outside of Atlanta. I live about 20 minutes from downtown, and every year the PGA Tour's last event is the Tour Championship, which is played at the East Lake Golf Course, which is right outside of downtown. And a year or so ago, my wife said to me, "Why don't you always go every year as a spectator? Have you ever thought about volunteering?" And I said, "No, I never really had thought about it because I just like to go and do my own thing." She goes, "Why don't you think about it?" So I did. Last year, I signed up to volunteer. And then I did it again this year. And both years I was lucky enough to be stationed at the 15th hole, which is that short par 3 over the water. So it was really hot, but it's a lot of fun because it's only a field of 30 players, and so it goes pretty quickly. And I was a marshal on the 15th tee for 3 of the 4 days. And to be inside the ropes and to be that close to those guys, and they make it look ridiculously easy. I'm not a golfer. I've taken lessons. I caddied for 9 years. I've got brothers that played. My kids play. One of these days, maybe I'll finally put my mind to it and do it. But it's such a hard game, but they make it look so easy. And to be that close to it was a fun way to spend the weekend, even though it was in the 90s every day.
I think I told you this in the email. My handicap starts when I leave the golf cart. So, all right. Now, where are these books available at, Dan?
Well, you can get them on my website, classicrockssongsrevealed.com,
Okay.
classicrockssongsrevealed.com, or you can get them on Amazon.
All right.
And people can get them on Kindle, or they can order the books, the hard books from Amazon or from my website.
Awesome. Very good. We'll include those down in the show notes. So if anyone's driving today wanting to get that information, just look at the show notes when you get to a safe place, you pull over or wherever like that. And we'll of course, all you do is click on the link. It'll take you right to that. All right. How about one from your choosing, Dan? I'll let you have carte blanche to choose one of those stories that we haven't talked about already.
Oh, wow. Let's see. Well, I had a really nice long conversation with Randy Bachman
BTO
from Guess Who and BTO.
Mm-hmm.
And the song "Taking Care of Business" actually was a song that he wrote. That it was called "White Collar Worker" that he brought in for the Guess Who, and it was fashioned after the Beatles' "Paperback Writer."
Mm-hmm.
And when he brought the song into them, the band, the Guess Who, panned it, saying, "You can't do that. That's Paperback Writer. It sounds too much like it. And it's got a little Neil Sedaka in it. No, you can't do that." So he put it away. And when he left the band because he had health issue. And so then he and his brother, formed, and Fred Turner formed BTO. And he was, he's one of these guys that when he hears a phrase or watches TV programs, he was a note taker, and he would write down all these catchphrases. And he was driving one day and he heard a disc jockey say, "This is Tommy Doe, and I'm taking care of business here on WXRK, blah, blah, blah." And he was taking care of business. He wrote that down. He filed it away. Well, then BTO was performing in Canada, and Fred Turner came down with some laryngitis. And so he couldn't sing. And he had told Randy Bachman, "You're going to have to sing." And so Randy Bachman started singing Eo Como Va and a bunch of Neil Young songs that are in a lower register. And the fans started getting a little rowdy, saying, "Rock and roll, rock and roll." And so he was like, okay, he looked at his brother and he said, "Just follow me. It's G minor, B minor, D minor, just repeats." And he started playing that lick, to the start. And you get up every morning from the alarm clock morning, take the 8:15, all those lyrics. And then he didn't have a chorus. And then just to stream it, when it came to the time for the chorus, he said, "And I'm taking care of business every day, taking care of business every way." And so they just did that and vamped out, and the crowd loved it. Well, now it came time to go into the studio and record, and they recorded the song, and the record executive came in and wanted to hear the album, and he didn't hear really anything that he really thought that they could put out for you guys like used to play as a top 40 hit. And they said, "Play that song." And he played "Taking Care." And then the record executive said, "That's a smash. That's going to be a single." He said, "You like that?" And he said, "Yeah, and I really like the fact that you added piano," and how the piano got in.
I know this story. I know this story. Go ahead.
Who was across the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Norman Durkee was recording in Seattle, and Norman Durkee was a session player at the time, and he was across the hall in a session, and their producer came across. He said, "Hey, Durkee, I need a piano player. Can you come help us out?" He said, "No, I can't. I'm busy." He goes, "I'll pay them. Let him go on a break. I'll take care of it. I need you to come in." And so he went into the studio. He looked at Randy Bachman and he said, just get, I don't even, just, when you want me to play, you point and I'll play. And when you want me to cut, give me the cut sign. We're stocking the cut sign. He just put the headphones on. They played it. Bachman pointed to him and he started playing that piano thing that's so recognizable in that song. Did it one time, got up and he said, "That's it." And he goes, that, and Randy Bachman was like, "That was amazing." Yeah. And he goes, "Well, thanks." He goes, "Well, I got to go back. I got a session going." He did put that down. Yeah, I think he got paid like $90 for a performance fee, and that was that.
Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Now, the books are called Classic Rock Songs Revealed Volumes 1 and 2. I'm realizing this, the holidays are fastly approaching. This is going to be the ideal gift for that rock and roller on your list that's hard to buy for. So once again, Amazon.com and the website. What's the website name again, Dan?
ClassicRockSongsRevealed.com.
All right, very good. We're speaking with Dan Reagan. He is the author of those books. He's also a 5-time Emmy winner as a sports TV director. Dan, it's been a real treat. I really and truly would love to spend an hour or two or a couple of bottles of wine and just go over this together. But we do have to go. But thank you so very much, Dan, for being on the podcast.
Rick, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate it. Best of luck in all your future endeavors. And best of luck, I'm really impressed. 96 countries you're in. That's amazing.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for listening to this episode of Someone You Should Know. Now, if you're an aspiring musician or an established musician that's looking for a little exposure, I invite you to drop us a line at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. That's someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. Also, I invite you to tell a friend about the Someone You Should Know podcast. I thank you for tuning in this time, and I invite you to check us out next time on the Someone You Should Know podcast, because you never know who's going to show up. Until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.